formalities to get things started, and then we'll come back to the public session, which I will open for the planning applications.
Am I permitted to record this?
You are, yes. You can record it, and indeed the council will record it, which I will announce as I start the session.
Yeah,
you can record it.
Video, is that allowed?
You're allowed to video it. It's something that should be spoken of, and you shouldn't be, I mean, this is all a bit open to guidance, but the guidance is you shouldn't be videoing at least the members of the public if they don't wish to be.
That's fine. I should just be pointing it forwards throughout. Thank
yes.
You.
If anybody,
I'd like to do the same as well.
If anybody doesn't wish to be videoed, I don't particularly wish to be videoed, but I have to put up with it. If anyone doesn't wish to be videoed, then you need to sit further back so that you're not included. Okay. You are entitled to record the public session, as we do. Record the public session. Okay, we're going to start the meeting then. So I will open the council meeting formally, and we'll start with the apologies and reasons for absence.
Dr. Alan Lloyd-Smith is on holiday, so
which we accept.
Yes.
Good. Is there a declaration by members of any interest pecuniary or other than pecuniary in accordance with the Council's Code of Conduct and its guide to the declaration of Councillors' interests and related matters? I didn't see anything. No one's got a declaration. Number four. Sorry, I was too quick.
33 Swan Street, opposite me. Someone declaring on that one.
As a non-pecuniary?
Yeah.
So it means that you can take part if you wish. You don't have to leave. It's up to you. And no others. Okay. I don't have any applications then in terms of dispensations, and a reminder to everybody, which I've already said, that the meeting is being recorded. So at this point I will adjourn for the first of those two public sessions, and that is for contributions from the public on the planning applications or anything else on the agenda, not counting the big plan to 2030. And we'll do the planning applications first in order. The first one on the agenda is 12 Coombe Lands, the erection of a single-storey detached annex accommodation. So does anyone want to speak on behalf of that application? Nobody here for that, or don't want to speak? Okay. Does anyone want to make any other comments on that application? Okay, we'll move on then. We'll come to the council's deliberations after the public session. The next one is 33 Swan Street, single-storey front extension, insertion of a roof light. Does anyone want to speak on behalf of that 33 Swan Street? No? Does anyone want to make any comments about it otherwise? Yes, somebody at the back.
Nearest neighbour on the downside of Swan
Oh, Ray, sorry, I couldn't recognise you initially, yes.
Have a haircut.
Right.
Just to say that neither Wendy nor myself see any problem at all with the proposals, and we would welcome the aesthetic changes which are part and parcel of them.
Thank you for telling us that. That's helpful. So that's on the down river side, the down the slope.
Down road side, yeah.
Okay. Any other comments from anyone else? No? And now we've got 12 Poplar Road, construction of two-storey side extension, single-storey rear extension, front porch and side carport. That's at the old post office. Does anyone want to speak in?
I am that man, yes.
You are that man. Is that all you wish to say?
I don't have anything to say unless anybody else has questions to ask.
Okay, that would be helpful if people have got queries. Anyone want to speak other than the owner or raise questions, of course, or indeed councillors? Wow, we're rushing through these planning applications really well. Okay, thank you. Does anyone want to say anything in this public session, part A as it were, about any of the other items on the agenda? It is a very short agenda because as some of you will know, this is an extraordinary meeting. We don't normally meet in August, but we have to this month because we've got the deadline for the consultation. Does anyone want to ask about anything else on the agenda? Yes, Miriam.
Item 6, please. The cemetery extension, as you know, has been heard in private session for several months now.
Yes.
Are we able to know how much money has actually been spent on this? This is public money. I see that you are to pay the balance of fees and disbursements. And agreement that, are we allowed to know the amount that has actually been spent?
I'm sure you will. I think you're labouring under a slight misapprehension, but I understand why. The discussions in closed session have had nothing to do with money whatever, and I mean it's about the way in which we are endeavouring to proceed with the project. It's project management, if you like, or in fact it's not even that. It's really trying to figure out options for the way forward, and the money, as you were actually here I think a couple of months ago, was dealt with in open session at that time. It was on the agenda because you raised the same question, what's going on in the closed session, and I said when it needs to be open and can be open it is, and it was on the agenda that month. So we passed the money that month in open session. This is going to be passed in open session, and the clerk will be able to tell us exactly where we are in terms of the deposits that were given, approved in open session, and the closing balance.
So
The closed session will not cover money, as it indeed it wouldn't be able to, I don't think, or it would certainly be very exceptional. But it hasn't done, and it won't tonight. Anything else? No. Can I close this part of the public session then? You're all happy? Okay, so I'll close the public... Sorry, did I see a hand go up? No. We'll close the public session then, and we'll now go on to the council's own discussion of those planning applications. So the first one is 12 Coombe Lands, the single story. I'm sorry,
can
have
I
I
just
jumped
ask,
ahead?
well, just when are we going to approve the minutes of the last meeting?
It's the first item. That's right.
Have we?
Number 1. Number 3.
Oh, sorry, I've jumped past it. I beg your pardon. You're quite right. I've been corrected. We've got to do the minutes now, so that'll be our first item. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes? Any corrections? Any worries? Or can I sign them? No one got any problems?
Yeah. Okay.
No, sign there. Thank you very much.
Okay, they're signed. So we're now on to the 12 Coombe Lands planning application, 00929, the erection of a single-storey detached annex.
My agenda minutes are, the number is incorrect.
Ah, yes, I
It
did
should be-
see it's 989, isn't it? 989, I did spot that. We did get an email in from the neighbour, which seemed to say, really, not a problem. So she wanted to know what the outcome was, but recognised it was just up to us to decide. We haven't heard anything tonight. Who would like to start us off on this one?
Yeah, I've got no problems supporting the application.
Anybody else?
I've noted the comments that we've raised. I'm no objections to proceeding.
Me neither.
Okay, so are we unanimous that I'm happy, so are we unanimously in support of that?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. 33 Swan Street, the bungalow with the dormer on one side, single-storey front extension. Now we've heard tonight from Ray, who said that he's all right with his wife on that side. I think we've had an email from the other side, haven't we? Have you all seen that email?
Yes, I did pass it
We've had
down.
anxieties on the other side
Yes.
about privacy. So who would like to start off the discussion on this one? George?
I was only just going to say, in terms of Ray's comment, he didn't just say it was all right, he said it would be an improvement, which I think is a step forward from being just all right.
I think that's true, isn't it? Because it takes away the flat roof carport at the front.
Well, I think it's replacing UPVC with cedar boarding as well, which
Yes,
is the
true,
other issue.
true.
In terms of the neighbour's comment, I mean, I'm not really in a position physically, I haven't looked to see what impact that would have, to be honest. But it seems like a justifiable comment.
Anybody else want to report?
No, I've got nothing to add to that. I agree. I think it's an improvement, and I noted the other comments. I'm not sure that's something that would preempt an approval, so I'd support it.
I would support it.
David?
Yeah, I would support it.
George, supporting? Sue?
I-
Oh no, you're ducking out. Sorry, this is the one that you've got your anxiety. Okay, I will also approve it, support it, I should say. So that is actually fully supported with one abstention. If that's not a contradiction in terms.
Yeah, that's fine.
Supported with one abstention because of another interest. Okay, we go on then to 12 Poplar Road, the old post office. We didn't hear any comments, we haven't had
No,
any
I don't
emails. Who wants to start us off on that? People are unusually quiet tonight.
Yeah, I can't see any problem with it. It
No.
looks very nice, actually.
I think the design well thought out.
Yeah.
Okay,
Put forward
and it's
all
on the
importance.
eastern side,
Yeah.
and we haven't heard anything
No.
against from that neighbour. So
It's
does everyone
think so,
support
yeah.
it?
I think it's
It'll put a front door on it.
Yeah,
Yes.
So we're all fully in support.
yeah.
That's good. Okay, so that's the planning applications that I said we would do at this point. So if anyone wants to leave at this point, you don't need to, but if anyone wants to bail out, and there's only one probably from that planning application side, you may, of course. Anyone can go at any time. You're not held here. But other than that, I shall now then, if we're ready to do that, I shall reopen the public session.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm reopening the public session now then to talk about the ABC plan to 2030. Let me just suggest a few points before we actually head off into the full discussion. I think you probably all know that the key point for Wittersham is a new inclusion since the draft plan last year that we saw and commented on at the time, of a new site that Ashford have put forward for around 40 houses, dwellings I should call them. They say two-storey, but let's call them dwellings, between Lloyd's Green and Woodland View and Jubilee Field. It's a proposal by ABC, Ashford Borough Council, not by the Parish Council. If anyone's uncertain about where it is and haven't picked stuff up from the exhibition, I've brought a handful, but only a handful of little maps here. If anyone wants, there are 10 or 11 here, if anyone wants to have one of these, put your hand up, feel free. Okay, you can come and get them afterwards if you want anyway. My personal view right now, and I will decide what I think later, but my personal view at this point is I don't think it's a good proposal, but that's whether set against the previous scheme from 2015 or on its own merits, both in terms of the points that were raised against it last time, but particularly in terms of the access now via roads already mentioned, Woodland View, Jubilee Field, Lloyd's Green. But that's my initial view standing here right now, and it's before I hear from you, it's before I hear from other councillors. And I look forward to seeing if I should hold on to my present view or if I'm persuaded by you or councillors to change it and support the scheme. Now, residents can put their points of view to councillors, but councillors must still make up their own minds, and I do stress that. It has been misunderstood in the past. Councillors are not here to do a count up and see who votes on which side from the members of the public. Councillors are legally obliged to make their own minds up rationally and on the basis of what they think. I would suggest to you, before you start telling us, that reasons and ideas are better influencing councillors than just restated views. And in the interest of everyone's patience, please don't keep repeating the same points at length. But by all means, say that you subscribe to them and that you agree with what someone said, but it doesn't need to be banged home and again and again and again, because we'll run out of time. There's a lot of people here tonight. Before we start, just to get a feel of those attending, can I ask you, please, can I have a show of hands so we just know who's here, of who lives in the Lloyds Green, Forge Meads, Jubilee Fields, Woodland View complex, if I call it that, so we just know who's directly affected, because there's no question it does directly affect those people, if only by traffic.
We live in listed buildings.
You're in the white
Formerly Cottage,
yes. Okay, I understand. And obviously there you're backing onto it, aren't you? But
Yeah.
most of it's up in the other things. So we had most people, I think, probably about 3/4, was it, putting your hands up? Can you put them up again? Oh, yeah. Okay. And then obviously the others are living elsewhere. Okay, thank you. For the purposes of timing, how many people at this point expect, I'm not holding you to it, but how many people expect to want to make a contribution, talk during the public session? So probably, in the 10 region, and it may 8, 10, and it may lead to other people wanting to come back. Just a warning, I may have to cut people short if necessary to give everyone who wants to speak a chance to speak, to safeguard the statutory business of the meeting, because we've got to get to the council meeting after this, again, to make our decision. That's what it is for. And obviously to maintain everyone's patience. It was 11:10 last month when we went home, and I don't really want to be that late again, but this is important. And that's why I ask, please, to say what you need to say without repeating other people's points. And lastly, a reminder, the main business tonight is this. It's to discuss ABC's plan to allocate a site for about 40 dwellings between Lloyds Green and Woodland View, and decide the council's response to it. And we should focus on that and not get carried away into dead ends that don't help us reach that decision. So off we go. Who would like to start?
I'll start.
Please.
I'd just like to confirm.
Oh, but sorry, can I just say, when you do speak, if you give, I don't think you have to give a name, but if you can tell us roughly where you live, it helps us to know what you're talking about.
I'll happily do that. I'm Graham Keane. Hello, Wittersham. I live in White Cottage, which backs onto the proposed development.
Right.
So my question to you, Jeremy, I just want to confirm a couple of things. Firstly, you're telling me then that you are as against this proposed development as you were against the development opposite your house in the Meadows.
What development opposite my house?
I believe there was a proposed site opposite the Meadows which you were against. So you're now telling me you're against this site as well. Or am I wrong? Was there never any proposed site in the Meadows?
There were sites put forward to Ashford by in the site submissions. There were 3 of them.
Right.
There was the one by the Meadows.
There was Stocks, and then
there was the one at Stocks, and not this one. The third one is behind Jubilee Fields, where houses are being built. And at that time, which I think was in about 2012, 2013, something like that, my answer to Ashford at that time was that the only one that I regarded on a sustainability agenda as being right was the one between Jubilee Fields, behind Jubilee Fields. And in doing that, I was supporting a resolution that the council had already made that said that the only site we wanted was the Jubilee Fields one. Later on, that was back then, the council had taken that decision that Jubilee Fields is where we wanted to build affordable housing, or see affordable housing built, I should more accurately say. And I supported the council agenda and said that that was the one that was sustainable, small site, local needs housing. Subsequently, to move on, when Pipers had a planning application made, along with other councillors at the time, there were 5 of us because we had 2 vacancies following the election in 2015, I supported Pipers.
Right.
The one opposite the Meadows has never been brought forward at that point, because Ashford ruled it out. They've ruled it out more than once.
So my question to you, Jeremy, is why is the parish council so determined to build in our village?
That's a slightly different question.
Well, it's not. It's
No, hold on a minute. You started off saying, you started off comparing the one by the Meadows, which we'll call Mooresfield,
right, Mooresfield, okay.
Against this one.
Okay.
And
it's development in the village.
If
you
you're
intend to develop, build houses,
okay.
call it what you like. You
Okay.
want to build
All right.
houses in an area of outstanding natural beauty.
Okay, if you're asking me if I think that we need houses in the village, then I think we do. I don't think that this site, and I've already said that, unless I'm persuaded otherwise, is a particularly good one.
Why
And
do
we'll
you
come
believe
on to
that
that.
the village needs houses?
Because I think if we don't have some houses, then it will atrophy.
It's been here since the Viking times.
But not at this size. It's grown slowly, and it's got to the stage now of about 520 houses. It clearly didn't have those 520 houses before. If you're saying as that your view of the village, and you're entitled to this view, should be that nothing changes here on in, including this site, but any other as well, then that's a view that you can put. That's not my view, by the way. I said that I don't think this site is a good one. I'm not suggesting that I don't believe in any new housing. I think that there is a view, and I can't remember the source, but it's been put in various reports, that rural locations should steadily develop, but steadily. If they don't, it's a bad idea. I don't have a definition of steadily.
So steadily could be 100 houses, could be 200, could be double the size of the village.
I've not suggested that at all.
If there's no infrastructure for the sewage, there's not enough places in the school, you can't turn out onto the road in that place, and I live on that bend, so I should know. It's a great place to build houses.
And you're arguing with all those points with the wrong person, except in one case. Bear in mind that Ashford's policy has particularly focused on sewage and has said that that would have to be sorted out. Okay. But otherwise, apart from that, I take your point. I mean, I take your point that you have anxieties.
It's to build affordable housing. Well, why would you not build it in Ashford where the brownfield sites and the houses are more affordable, rather than 100 grand more in our village where people won't be able to afford it? So there
won't be 100 grand more, but affordable housing is something that their policy requires for about 1/3 of the housing. And I won't try and define affordable housing for you because it's a technical issue that I'm not fully on top of. But they will require, bear in mind it's only a site, but if a developer comes forward to build that site, then I believe they'll be required to do about 1/3 in affordable. Okay, let's move on to somebody else. Thank you very much.
This proposed thing, the houses, the houses near the wood.
No, for a site. It's a site for houses.
Yes,
there's no one has come forward to say they'll do any houses.
Yeah,
but Ashford is thinking of making a site available on which they're proposing to say in the plan this is a site on which housing could be built. Yeah, but no one has yet proposed housing.
Can I just say something then? The houses sort of run alongside the wood. They're going to be sort of first class houses with a nice outlook. The houses the other side, they're going to be second class, aren't they?
I don't know because no one's put a thing forward, except that Ashford in their plan, and they've marked it on the plan, has said that they'll keep a buffer zone between the wood and the housing of 50 metres.
Yeah, but if you live near the wood, you've got lovely views, haven't you? Yes or no?
Potentially, but that's not one for us. This is about a site for housing, not about a planning application. If there were ever to be a planning application on that site, if indeed it gets into the plan, then that would have to come back again. Ashford will decide it in due course, but we will have the opportunity to give our views, and you will have the opportunity to come and give yours as well.
Can I ask? So I've read the NPPF document, your obviously called strategy document. I've looked at your statements in relation to building on areas of outstanding natural beauty. And obviously you have said that major developments will not be permitted in areas of outstanding natural beauty unless there are exceptional circumstances where a need is proven. Now I've read through a number of documents in terms of what the definition of major development is, and having looked at the Civil Parish 2011 numbers, our population at that time was 1,112 people. 40 homes, 2 3-bedroom homes. That equates, I say, to 10% of our existing population. I call that major development. Therefore, why are we even entertaining this idea? And if we are entertaining it, then please set out for me what these exceptional circumstances are and where we are proving it.
Okay, can I stop you at that point then? I think that's the point you've made. Let me correct what is possibly a widespread misunderstanding. You're pointing your question at the wrong people. Hold on. Ashford are the people who have put this plan draft forward. Ashford are the people who will defend it if it goes into the final version at the inspector's examination in public, at which any of you can go and have a go at the inspector as well. And if Ashford, if it gets into the plan eventually when it's passed by the inspector with any changes he requires, and I believe they generally do, then it'll be Ashford who decide a planning application that might come forward for that site. The NPPF is a government document. The planning policies are all Ashford's. All we're doing as the minnow in this at Wittersham Parish Council is that we're asked statutorily to give our views, whatever they are, exactly as you do. And so we'll, later on in the evening, we will decide between ourselves, the councillors, what we think our response to it is. It may be where I started, just to spell out something to get us going. It may be the opposite. It may be in between. It may be, you know, it's a jigsaw. But don't please say in your mind or otherwise, well, how are we justifying this, that, and the other? We're not justifying anything.
Is the proposal a major development?
The last thing I heard on the subject is that there is no definition legally of major development.
No, I know that, and I've gone through a
I do, however,
which have actually highlighted it is.
I do, however, wonder, and I have expressed this. I do wonder myself, and I've expressed this in conversations, how this would stand against the one of 27 that was turned down in the AONB, and that's one of the things that I'm afraid, until someone explains it to me better, I have difficulty reconciling. I know the argument that has been put, let's say, that is being tossed about, is in a different place. It is visually, what's the best word? It's visually protected by the fact that there's a wood on the north and there's housing around the other three sides. So indeed, absolutely. So it is put that in terms of the AONB, you can't see it as much as you could the other site. I find, sorry, let me just finish. I find that, yes, I'll stop in a moment. I find that hard to accept, but I also worry about the access to it because it's not got good access. Sorry, on you go.
Just on that point that you've mentioned about the fact that it's because it's not seen, you're saying because it's not seen from the road.
I'm not saying that, but I mean it's kind of factual.
Because it's not seen from the road, it's a better site.
That's what's been put to me.
The countryside comes to our doors. We're in the countryside.
Indeed, I take that point.
And I find it somewhat insulting that a delivery driver's view of the villages, the entered villages, are taken into our higher considerations, and that the people who actually live in it, work in it on a daily basis, every day of their life. So
I understand your point.
That I find a bit insulting. That
no, but that's being put to me. I mean I said slightly. Not tonight, I said slightly sort of satirically, the only difference is that you can't see it from the main road, and I was given to understand that that is actually, you know, one of the benefits that it has, that you don't see it from not only the main road, but from the east or the west either.
Isn't addressed just from the road.
No, I take your point. I totally understand that. And it is in fact seen from one part, which is of course on the eastern end. If I hold this up, if any of you can see it, it is seen, of course, across here.
And also across our garden.
Oh, I understand about your garden, but I'm talking about open land.
You're just doing this so people, the parish council, where it may be you can make some money. A developer can make money. What's it going to do? We're not doing anything. We're not doing anything at the minute. And as for the parish council making money, well, not so as you would notice. I mean, if you're saying that with every extra house, we get an average of about an extra £25 a year in council tax, that is true, but we're obviously not going to get rich that way. So why are you having houses there?
We are not having anything, please. Let's just leave that point. We are not having anything. We are responding to a proposal that's been put to us by our principal authority, who is the planning authority. We have not decided anything yet. and we're not the proposer of this. We're not the guardian of policies. Please don't put us in that position. We are simply the parish council, and the things that we do, particularly I run the caretaker scheme and run the cemetery and one or two other things. We do not decide planning policy. I'm sorry, I'll come to Pat next.
Can I explain to the gentleman? A lot of us were glad when houses were built. There's a lot of people in this room when Forge Meads was built, where I live. With regard to this proposal from Ashford Borough, I think it's too many houses in the wrong place. But I am not against. We need new houses every year. We've got more youngsters. We need to keep our village alive, and we can cope with 3-4 houses a year. The village.
Fair enough, I agree with
that. My own opinion.
Over a phase period.
Come on, can we stop, please? Don't debate between yourselves. Don't debate between us. Hold on. Don't debate between yourselves. Talk to the room. You're not against 3 or 4 houses.
Too many houses in the wrong place and possibly too quickly. And our other fear from a lot of us living Forge Meads and Jubilee, that once that 40 is there, with access, with drainage, it opens it up for a lot more. That is our fear. I'm not personally against, we need houses. Right. We need to keep our youngsters here. We need to keep the village thriving. Otherwise we'll die like we nearly did a few years back.
Sure. Okay. Sorry, it was you.
Yes. I'd like to speak briefly on the need for housing and on the habitat that the development is being proposed to build. And with regard to the need for housing, there's no evidence that the need for housing in this AONB is exceptional in the sense of unusual or rare for the purposes of paragraphs 115 and 116 of the MPPE. Even if there is an exceptional need for housing in this AONB, there may be alternative sites to the one we're discussing that are more suitable because development there would result in less harm to the ONB landscape.
Sure.
On the habitat question, MPPF paragraph 106 states quite clearly that the planning committee should minimise the impact on biodiversity, contributing to the government's commitment to halt overall decline in biodiversity, all of which is laid out clearly in Biodiversity 2020, a strategy for England's wildlife and ecosystems. P117 states that planning policy should promote the preservation of priority habitats and the protection of priority species populations. P118 states that when determining a planning application of significant harm to a priority species resulting from a development that cannot be avoided by locating to an alternative site with less harmful impacts, the permission should be refused. Now I want to move on to the priority species.
Can I respond to that so far, and then you tell me about priority species? I think, with all due respect, you're putting your points to the wrong people, because they are deeply technical points in the MPPF. They are really, to use the cliche, above our pay grade at the parish council. They are certainly the material that the professional town and country planners at Ashford Borough Council are paid to be on top of. And even then, you will find, and a judge at the appeal court said it only recently in an aside in a judgment, he said that policies for planning are notable for, and these are my words rather than his, but basically this is what he said, policies in planning are notable for contradicting one another. But what you're saying to us is really not something that we will take on board, because the MPPF, this, that and the other are really beyond us. We're going to give our own view of a local response to local issues on this site application. And please, you are. Now you are. Now you're going. Please go on to biodiversity.
Speak about species.
Species, yeah.
Okay.
Please do.
our national hedgehog population has declined from 30 million to 1 million over the past 20 to 30 years, and is now listed as an endangered species and is categorised as a priority species in the UK Biodiversity Plan. Because of its unique geology and location as an island surrounded by wetland, the Isle of Oxney, including Wittersham, is a hedgehog hotspot. In the 3 years that we have lived here, we see them when they are not in hibernation every night, as do many of our neighbours. It surprised me to learn that the home range of a hedgehog is 10 to 12 hectares, and that an adult travels up to 2 kilometres a night in search of food. Adult males go up to 3 kilometres in search of females.
Can I ask where you're seeing them? Where are you seeing them?
If the development plan is proposed, the development plan you're proposing to put up a 50, not you, Ashford, a 50-metre buffer between the development and the woodland edge, that is is grossly inadequate in respect of a mammal that has a home range of 10 to 12 hectares. My last 2 points on this: the development would destroy the habitat of an endangered species in an area where the hedgehog population is an important national nucleus. If the housing can't be built here, you can build it somewhere else. If you destroy, Ashford destroys that habitat has gone for good and will increase the loss of this much loved endangered species.
Okay, thank you for that.
They're running all over the place.
Can I ask you where you are that you see these hedgehogs?
Pardon?
Where are you that you see the hedgehogs?
15 Lloyd's Green on the
You're in
corner.
Lloyd's Green, okay, thank you. That's what, up at the end?
Yeah, right up at the end.
Okay, I'm with you.
I'll invite you around to see the barn elves and I'll go on as well. So
All right. Okay, thank you for that contribution. I wasn't aware that the Isle of Oxney, or indeed Lloyd's Green, was you put it hotspot for hedgehogs. I'm certainly keen that we do what we can nationally on hedgehogs. That's not usually our top priority. The little girl?
In my opinion, I think that it would be a bit hard for, think about the busy road around Poplar Road. It's already busy enough, and if we have 40 more houses around Meads, then that road's going to get more busy. It's going to be more difficult for kids just like me to cross the road and get to school. And it's very
Where do you have to cross the road?
down in Poplar Road.
Poplar Road.
In Poplar Road.
Can we have a round of applause for that?
Well done.
Also, that brings a problem. All the cars come out of Lloyd's Green onto the main road,
Yep.
and that is a nasty call.
Indeed.
Very nasty.
Good call. Absolutely. Because at the moment there's only a limited amount of cars that come up there. But if they're all
Thank you for that. It is one of my anxieties, yes. Thank you. Okay, shall we go up to, there's Phil at the back.
The general 2 points. The general point, first of all, I do think that because this at the moment is something outside the parish council, it's just a recommendation, and government recommendation, all villages are being required to do this. We will not do it. And therefore, you should make the representations to Ashford Borough Council specifically. I have that covered all the time, but I've spent a lot of time writing to Ashford Borough Council about this, and I think this is what should be done, not lambasted by the council. The other point of this, with regard to the gentleman who spoke about biodiversity, the worst problem we can have is the density of tents. You look at what's going on in Tenton at the moment, how do you think we're going to get away without something like that? And so what you do require is good biodiversity and a healthy ecosystem in a housing estate, because most of this country, private gardens are much healthier than the wider countryside. And if you create a biodiversity, a good ecosystem in a housing development, with holes in the bottom of the houses for the hilltops, bird boxes, bat boxes, nesting boxes, fruit trees, a nice pond, and a nice orchard for it, on grade 2 agricultural land, which is sterile, absolutely sterile. There is no life in it whatsoever.
It's a grade 2, so you're saying that's grade 2 agricultural listed land? If it's sterile, why are there badgers,
Okay, one at a time, please. Let Phil have his bit. Let Phil have his statement. Shush, shush. Let Phil have his piece.
And if you get all the information you can from all the wildlife trusts and all the other wildlife organisations, you find out what's going on. You put a bit of soil from grade 2 agricultural land under a microscope, it's dead. If you put a speck of soil from a really healthy ecosystem, you see it's really...
Are you suggesting we turn every bit of green in this country into a back garden?
No, of course I'm not.
Seems to be what you're saying.
Hold on. I don't want you shouting at each other. Phil has been saying something, as you did yourself.
Excuse me, the Parish Council voted for a smaller development of 27 houses with exactly this kind of healthy ecosystem, which would have been much healthier for the wildlife and the people, and that was fought against, and now where we go.
Thank you. Who's next? Put hands up again. Miriam.
Right, okay, can we take this back, please, to the role of the Parish Council in all of this? We had a draft plan issued which gave no sites to Wittersham. Ashford decided that they would give the ultimate protection to the AONB, and that is all the AONB land in the borough. There were no sites allocated in any areas which are designated AONB because they've got the highest level of protection, the same level of protection as national parks. The leader of the council twice in planning committee stated that commitment, and indeed when the planning committee unanimously refused the Stocks Road application, and it was repeated then that they were going to give great protection to the AONB because it was valued, and they had sites coming out of their ears. There were people putting sites forward all over the borough, people obviously who owned land wanting to make money out of it, understandably. There was no shortage of sites. So for those of us who spent an awful lot of time opposing major sites in the whole of this village, not just at the Stocks Road, upholding paragraph 116, which says that there can only be a major development in an AONB if exceptional circumstances can be found. The government inspector at Stocks Road said quite clearly that there are no exceptional circumstances in Wittersham, the whole of Wittersham, to justify a major site. Now that decision should apply to Stocks Road, it should apply to the Meadows, it should apply to Jubilee Fields, it should apply to any site that any developer wants to put forward. So why are we where we are now? Why has that changed? Well, we all had a chance to comment on that draft plan, and many of us wrote in and commended Ashford Borough Council for protecting the High Weald AONB, which represents one of the finest medieval landscapes in the whole of Northern Europe. We might not recognise it here because we see it every day, but this is a beautiful landscape which should be protected. Now, the Parish Council's response to that was as follows. The parish of Wittersham lies entirely within the High Weald AONB, leading the draft local plan to avoid allocating any sites for housing in Wittersham. The only mechanism left for slow and cautious growth for the next 14 years is therefore policy WHO4, which allows minor infielding pegged with a number of restrictions in WHO4 and WHO3. In Wittersham, however, those sites once available for infilling within the built-up area have now been exhausted over the years, and no, or virtually no, opportunities remain. The combination of the AONB policy with WHO4 therefore indicates 14 years of zero growth in this relatively isolated village community, which appears to go against the principles of rural development. Okay, There were quite a lot of other comments on the plan, but there was one other comment, only one other comment, supporting a development in Wittersham, and you might guess who that came from. It actually came from Clarefoot Homes, who wanted to build, and not 40 homes initially, 120. That's what they put in for, 120 houses on that site. And their comment was, the plan is not consistent with national policy as it fails to adequately provide housing provision within Wittersham. Allocate housing provision with Wittersham village in order to support the future sustainability of the village and to retain important local services and community facilities. So we have a developer who wants to gain from that land, deciding what we, the people of Wittersham, want. What was Ashford Borough Council's response? Those of us who wrote in to say, well done for protecting the A and B, we were ignored. The Parish Council, they were listened to, along with the developer, and the response was, an allocation is now proposed in Wittersham, new policy S61, which is the site we're here to talk about tonight, and the matters referenced in 2307, which was a villager who was concerned about the Parish Council's comments, relate to internal Parish Council issues. So those people who supported the fact that there was no site were told that that was just a village squabble, but in fact the developer was the person who they should listen to. Well, I say you should listen to the people of this village. You've asked for a show of hands of how many people have come here from Lloyd's Green. To my mind, it doesn't matter where they've come from in Wittersham. Yes, we want to see some local needs housing for our young people, as Pat said. Of course we do. And a lot of us would fight for that. We're getting 4. It's not enough. We need more. We need to fight for sites. That is definitely something
can you wind up now, please?
To the local plan. Yes, we have identified that we want to affordable housing for our young people. We do not want the type of housing which are going to end up on this site. So I'd say we need to ask the people here who've come, not
That's
where
enough.
they've come from, but do they support major development in the village? Do we support major development?
Hold on, we're going to carry on. Not everyone has spoken yet. Thank you for that, Miriam. Let me just come back on one particular point. You read correctly the submission from the Parish Council to the last draft last year, which said that it would be any growth here would be based on small infill, and we said we didn't think that infill still existed. It's been built on already. We also had the Voices survey, the housing, the Voices general survey of what people thought about various things in the village, which included housing. You used to quote from it, in fact, which by and large coalesced around people saying that they would like to see up to 5 a year. I tend to call that not 5 but 3, just to pick a number, 3 a year. The point that we were putting to Ashford, and this was clarified later in conversations with them as well, was that we were looking for small sites, and they said they would discuss small sites with us. But instead of that, they suddenly just said, well, we'll have an allocated site of 40. Why is that? Because last year, or after last year, when we saw the draft plan, which we responded to, Ashford were given new figures of how many houses they had to provide in the next 5 years and in the next 13, and it went up by 1,200, and they were getting into difficulties with finding any sites. They also found only last November that the Piper's site that we'd supported but Ashford hadn't, and had gone to appeal under a government inspector, they found last November that the inspector turned it down, with great rejoicing by some people. The Parish Council, of course, had supported it. So last November, Ashford may have had a small hope of getting 27 landed on them, even though they didn't want it. That didn't happen, and they've now come back with 40. But that's 40 towards 1,200. And this lot here, which is the one we're discussing tonight, is only the changes to last year. the changes that they're making, a little bit of which is the policy S61, which says an extra 40 houses in Wittersham on an allocated site, which we didn't have before. What Miriam said was right. It wasn't allocated before. We didn't expect it and we didn't want it. We wanted to have small sites that, if they couldn't be infill, would be tacked around the edge, because if you've no land in the middle, you've got to go somewhere else. That, in fact, as Miriam has just said, she would also support affordable houses. You have to find places to do it. That is what our support was for, and to suggest that we were actually keen on getting a site for 40 is wrong. We never were. Councillors can speak for themselves.
No, that can't make any sense, can it? Because you supported the Piper site. The Piper site, you know jolly well, was in 2 phases. There was phase 1, which was 27, and there was another phase for about 17, so we were going up to 44. And the Piper site in the local plan was for 60 houses. So what you were commenting on was a site for 60 houses.
We were commenting on a site for... We actually supported a planning application for 27.
Knowing full well, and the developer was very clear that that was phase 1 and phase 2 was following.
Knowing full well that they had talked openly about the possibility of phase 2, but they had not put in for phase 2, and if they did put into phase 2, it would have to come back. The fact, hold on. The fact is that they were putting in for 27 and we responded to it. We didn't get it. Ashford turned it down. The inspector turned it down. We are now where we are.
They've turned it down on the basis of Para 116, which must stand firm. We had a good meeting with the planning officers last Thursday, and Simon Cole, head of planning policy, thoroughly agreed that the council cannot go against policy and law, and he has agreed that the council's barrister will look at the Megadisi review, which is the only, well, one of the main case law cases on it, and that he will then get back to us. So it may well be that Ashford Borough Council will pull back this site on that basis, but the problem that we have now got is a carrot is handed out to that developer. He has it in his mind that Ashford think it's acceptable, and there is absolutely nothing to stop that developer, as has happened in Spard and in lots of other villages, is just jumping the gun on the plan and putting in a planning application, which obviously we will have to fight.
Well, if that happens, Miriam, we'll come to a planning application when we come to it. Tonight, what we have is a site allocation.
The result of the parish council saying that because we didn't get a site, we're not going to grow. Well, that didn't work because you didn't actually read the plan and see the policies that would allow growth. There were policies there. There were policies to allow small developments up to 3 outside the confines of the village. So there were opportunities. But my question to you now is, you have clearly known about this site since March. You chose not to share it with any of your parish councillors. You chose not to share it with anyone in this village, such that we risked the opportunity to go to Cabinet and to put our points to the council as to why a site in Wittersham would be contrary to the basic policy 116 in the MPPF, which says you have to find exceptional circumstances.
That's outrageous. If that's true, that's outrageous.
All right, hold on.
It's not true. You were meant to be looking after the village.
Hold on.
You have known about the site.
Miriam, can you just stop, please? There's no point badgering on. Please, carry on.
This is very personal.
Within the council's brief, if somebody is persistently holding up council meetings, that is protracted, nitpicking kind of conversation that's going on. Remove this person.
Okay, Phil. Okay, thank you. I'm not going to do that, but I do expect us to have an orderly meeting. If we don't have an orderly meeting, we'll have to finish. Now, Miriam has raised a question, and I shall answer it. It is true that in March, I was told in confidence by Ashford that they were thinking about putting this site in. That's what it was thinking. There wasn't anything I could do about it because it was in confidence, and secondly, it had not been decided. It was decided at a cabinet meeting in June, which Miriam has mentioned. It is true that we didn't go to the cabinet meeting. I had no idea that the cabinet meeting was in public. But if I didn't know, presumably Miriam didn't know because she could have gone.
If I'd have known about the cabinet meeting and it was discussed
Well, then you
on the
didn't
site,
know.
I would have been there.
Well, then you didn't
if
know.
I'd have known that
All right,
Wittersham had a site,
I'm
all
talking
the
at the
other
minute,
parish
Miriam.
councils had an opportunity to
Miriam,
go. You
Miriam.
said at that meeting
Hold on.
last month that you didn't know anything till the 7th of July. That was not the truth.
On the 7th of
July. It was not the truth.
Miriam, you are making this up as you go along.
I am not.
Shut up. On the 7th of
I beg your pardon?
I said shut up. On the 7th of July. On the 7th of July, Ashford announced the consultation on this site submission, and that is what you're all going to be able to put in your comments on. We're going to discuss tonight and decide what the council's is. That was on the 7th. In March, I was told that they were considering it. It had not gone in because it only got confirmed in June. And I found out about it the Tuesday before the council meeting that it had gone in. I looked it up. I spoke to Ashford and they said, we are not yet ready to announce the consultation. It will be at the end of the week, which was Friday. We had to put our agenda out on the Thursday. And I do not believe, you can all take your own views, but I do not believe we gain anything in terms of our reputation with our principal authority, Ashford, who are over us in most respects, particularly planning. They take the decisions, not us. I don't think we gain anything with Ashford by disclosing information that they're keeping confidential before they're ready to release it. The day they released it, it went on the Facebook page, it went on the website, and 2 days later, it went on. I said, okay, it was in the cabinet papers, but they were not making a point about it. The words they used to me was, it is technically in the public domain, but we are not drawing attention to it. And it's not for me to upset, Miriam, stop it. It's not for me to upset their decisions on how they release their information for what is now a public consultation. It was never something that was being kept secret forever. It was going to be made a public consultation when they were ready. They've announced that, it's going. We've had the exhibition in this village that many of you came to. We might not have got that. They only went round a few places. And the thing closed on the 31st of August. One more point. Miriam says, oh, all the parish councils this and all the parish councils that. There were 7 parish councils that went to appear at that cabinet. They must have been ahead of me in knowing that they could do it. They made representations at the maximum of 3 minutes a time. Normally only 2 permitted, but the leader allowed all 7. Those 7 made their representations. I've got the minutes which describe what they are, 7 pages of it. And how much effect did they have on the plan that we're considering tonight? Not 1 comma. In other words, hold on. It may not be the point, but the fact is that we have lost nothing. We're having the consultation now. You're going to put in your points to Ashford. They will consider then their final version, which will go to the inspector, and you'll be very welcome, of course, by the inspector to go and talk to him as well. The point you're making doesn't lead anywhere, and it doesn't change anything. So can we now go on, please, can we move on now to, yes, in your alternative universe, everything could be different, Miriam. Can we move on to other people who want to raise things? Can we move on to other people? Little girl, yes, please.
Also, if we have more houses, then if you also endangered species of animals, and also
True. Thank you. Can I ask now other people who have not spoken yet who still want to make a contribution? Yes.
You said Ashford Borough Council said that the sewage is going to be sorted out.
Yeah, I can.
When they was going to do their other development up at Wittersham, Southern Water actually said that the sewage is perfectly capable of taking them dwellings, which was 24, I believe. Well, if you any time, any month, there's dynamite here, got into the sewers, doing everything. You walk the dog nearly every day all around the village. If you walk down Back Street, you tell how many times you walk down there and you don't see sewage running down the road.
Let me tell you what the written thing from Ashford actually says. The S61, which is what has put this forward into the plan of how many 100 pages, has got 3.5 on us, okay? It's got the map, it's got a bit of discussion about why they think that it's a good idea and what they can do about stopping it being a bad idea and all the rest of it. And then it comes into a formal policy, S61, which is what then says, okay, our policy, if we pass this eventually, and if the inspector passes it, this is going to get us till next spring or summer, by the way, plenty to go yet. It has got paragraph E, and this is the one I was referring to, which I don't know if it solves your concern, but it deals with your concern. It says, development proposals for this site shall, that's at the top, and then E, provide a connection to the sewerage system at the nearest point of adequate capacity as advised by Southern Water, and indeed, it may be not, and ensure future access to the existing sewage system for maintenance and upsizing purposes. In other words, they have said that unless there's any developer who wants to build there, if it gets in and if this and if that, if the developer comes along and says, I'd like to build these 40 houses, they have got to go on the basis, according to this policy, of finding a point with adequate capacity as certified by Southern Water. Now, Southern Water can make their own minds up, but I can't imagine that they're not going to rub their hands and say, well, that's good because we've got someone else to pay for the thing that we've needed for years. But, I mean, that's just me saying that. The fact is, the policy is in there.
Have we got the power to say that the sewers are going to be put right?
I'm not saying that they can insist that they're put right. I'm not saying that they can do that, but they can say we're not going to allow another 40 houses in the inadequate sewers. They've got to find a way of doing it adequately. Now, whether they go for a point of adequate capacity, as it says in the policy, or whether they do something completely different, I'm not a sewage engineer, but I do wonder if they look at alternatives.
That's all they can do. They can't put a new main in anywhere. It's where they're going to go with it.
They'd have to go a long way, possibly. Or they, indeed, either they do that, or presumably, I don't know if this is at all practical, maybe they look at an alternative sewage works, a small package one. There are small package ones. I don't know if it's a good idea or not. I'm not a sewage engineer. Perhaps not. In which case, your answer could be that it will not be possible to build. Now, Ashford have said by putting it in the plan that they claim it is possible to build it. They have to be deliverable, as they call it, to put it in the plan as a site. Otherwise, they're cheating, because they've said, well, we'll get our numbers, all the thousands, of which there are 1,200 new ones. We've added them all up. There's 200 more in Charing, and there's 80 or something in High Holden, and there's so many in Biddenden, and this, that, and the other. And there's 40 in Wittersham. Added them all up together. If that 40 is not deliverable because of what you just said, absolute, bunkum, there's no way, then they're cheating. So I assume they feel it's possible, but I don't know the detail. But it's a good point, and I do agree with you on sewage. It is an issue, and everyone's told us that. Trevor.
Jeremy, I spoke to the Ashford Borough Council representative, accreditation, or whatever you want to call it.
Last week, yeah.
He assured me that they cannot go forward with any major development if Southern Water say that their pipe is adequate. Southern Water, no, it's not adequate.
Sure.
So there lies the rock in the heart.
Exactly. And that's a straightforward technical answer.
If this is a major development, and everybody here would like to have houses for the youngsters, all for that, I have no problem with that. But if the majority of this village, say, do we want 40, 50, 60, 80 houses, I assume, in my opinion, that the opinion would be no way, Jose. If that happened with the parish council, then take the lead and support the villagers in what they want for their future, which is not major development.
Sure. At the moment, what we have been doing is recognising the survey that was done for the up to 5. It has been suggested to us by, when I say us, by the way, me and Councillor Venning, we were standing talking to him. It's not a suggestion to the council, but the council will hear it now. I mean, it's something we'll have to discuss at another meeting. It's not on the agenda. But he was suggesting that possibly it would be a good idea to update the housing survey that we did, or the survey which had a housing section those years ago. We'll have to consider if we want to do that. We'll have to consider how we want to do it, say whether we want to, how we want to, when we want to, and see whether it leads anywhere. But judging from the last time, there is a desire. I mean, this is not uncommon. I think you find most villages, indeed most towns, most cities, they generally say, yes, we do need some more houses because I haven't got children, but most of you probably have. We've got children, we may have grandchildren. These people, you know, the population has grown quite substantially lately. We need houses for them. We'd rather they weren't here, or we'd rather they're not there, or whatever, but we obviously need houses. And the difficulty, of course, is always finding them. In this village's case, and I think perhaps a lot of villages' cases, my sense is little sites are easier to stomach and easier to absorb. Notwithstanding, let's just be honest with ourselves about this. Lloyd's Green was built in about 1952 with 30 odd houses. Forge Meads, Jubilee Fields, Woodland View were built over a period of a few phases and have now got, is it 80 houses or something? I can't remember, but something like that. We have how many?
84.
84. I think it was you who told me actually last Thursday. 84 houses. So we have been built up by some fairly big developments. I wouldn't mind betting that when those developments were being considered, people were against them. And yet many of you now, we've had the hands up, you know, many of you now live there, and I hope live there happily and enjoy what you get out of Wittersham. And we've got to, I think this is the wrong site. Personally, that was my starting position. I'll find out what I think at the end when I hear from other people. I think it's a problem because of access and because of the comparison with the one they turned down, which point has been made eloquently by several people already. But there's also this problem about where will small sites come from. I think we ought to be thinking ahead. I would like to think that we think ahead as to where we might find small sites to have modest development. But does it exist? Where does it exist? How are we going to find them? And if this site of 40 gets into the plan, this is another anxiety I have. If it does get into the plan, it's very hard for the parish council supporting the village's interests to say we want to go and look for some small sites when they say, well, you've got a site for 40, what's your problem? And that's the double whammy, really. That, you know, the old saying was that the best drives out the good or something, or the good drives out the best. No, the good drives out the best, I suppose, or the worst drives out the better. But the point is, I'm making a muddle of that. The point is that if that site for 40 is put on the plan, then Wittersham doesn't have much claim to say it wants a different one. But it's the different one, I think, from the sense of what people have said tonight, a lot of people would like. And we've got to think about how we deal with that. So now other people who still want to speak. We had the little girl last time. More, and Trevor. More hands up, yes?
Can I just make a brief point?
Please.
I remember at the planning appeal in front of the inspector for Piperland, we were talking about sustainability in terms of the school. And I think it was acknowledged at that point by the agent that the children who lived on those 27 houses would have to be bussed into Tenston to go to school because there wasn't the provision at Wittersham School. And I'm wondering if we have 40 houses for young people with children, whether that situation is now.
It is certainly, it's a good point, and it's certainly part of the broad sustainability question. We do not have many jobs. Most people travel, even if they're travelling people, they travel. We don't have a railway line. We don't have a secondary school. We don't have a doctor's surgery. We don't have any shops beyond our, fortunate to have it, convenience store. So it's not an ideal location in those senses. As for the primary school, a lovely Church of England primary school that we've got, the thing about the vacancies, the school has come up in numbers lately, and it's stronger than it's been for quite a while. My understanding, having talked to the headmistress on this very subject a few weeks ago when I saw her, and questioned it, because we understood that there were 3 classrooms, but there were some children who just moved to the village that I'd heard had to go to Tenterden, and I asked her why. And the problem is, and we can all understand this, there's about 110 pupils there, I think, or something of that order, spread over, of course, 6 years. It's lumpy. You have too many of this age and not enough of that age, and you can't mess around with your classes too much. You can run a classroom up until it's full, but you can't start the next one. You can't have a teacher for the next 3 children. So at any school of this size, it's quite difficult to manage peaks and troughs. But as far as they can, they have capacity in terms of getting more children into a classroom, but not into a class with a teacher. And that, I think, ebbs and flows from year to year. They all move up one, people move out, people come in, and of course the head and the governors, of which we've got one here in Sue, they have to handle that. So it's quite likely they would be bussed out, but they might not necessarily. It depends on the ages, and it depends on how things move from year to year. The other thing is, of course, that when children have been put into a school, you don't move them when you suddenly get vacancies the next year. So it's a tricky one. But we're lucky to have the school. It does mean a lot of children from this village and others immediately around us can go to it, get a good education, very good education now. But it's impossible to make it work for everybody. And it's a good point. Thank you. Another one, hands up. More?
Has a traffic assessment been undertaken on those roads? I understand there have been statements made, but I don't believe that they are specific to those sites.
The only thing I know, and I don't know a lot, the only thing I know is that it's mentioned in the Ashford policy papers there, the 4 pages, and I think it's half an answer to a smaller question. They've said that the Highway Authority, which is Kent County Council, is supportive of this point, which is that Kent has been quite unhappy for some years about the fact that 84 houses go up Forge Meads, dwellings, but houses, bungalows, they go up Forge Meads through a single point of access. And since it was built, wasn't at the time, since it was built, there is now a national policy that Kent subscribes to, which says you shouldn't have more than 50 up one point of access, because you may need a fire engine to go up there, and it may be blocked up with a, whatever. So they like 2 accesses. We, the parish council, actually argued against that policy when we wanted to get the 8 at the back of Jubilee Fields, and they said absolutely not, absolutely not, absolutely not. And then suddenly, and I had a discussion with the KCC officer directly myself on the phone, and then suddenly they agreed with Ashford that they would allow 4. Well, 84 and 4 is 88. I mean, it doesn't fit the policy. The county highway authority has said in here, according to the Ashford report, that they are happy to have the link through to Lloyd's Green because they've now got 2 points of access. But it's 84 plus 40 plus 30 odd. It's not that you can say, well, 2 points of access can only do 100, 250s, because obviously you've still got a choice. But nevertheless, you're pushing your luck a bit.
What's the access like?
And hold on a minute, let me just finish. All they're saying in here is that they would like the second point of access to be established by putting that link road in, whoopee. They have not, so far as I know, said, what about the bottom of Lloyd's Green, which I agree with someone who said earlier it's a very difficult junction. I think it's very poor. They haven't commented, as far as I know, on the difficulties of getting up Forge Meads and Jubilee Fields around the parking. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, you can't actually physically widen Lloyd's Green Road just as you turn into it, because the boundaries of number 2 and number 36 are right there. So you just can't widen it.
That is true. That is true. And we've also got the problem that it has the swan neck at the bottom, in my belief, but that's all it is, in my belief, because they realised they needed to move the junction towards the double bend to give you a chance of seeing round the middle part of it. But the trouble is, you're also nearer the bit that you can't see round the second part. And if, I think the worst thing probably is if people come along from the War Memorial and they want to turn up into Lloyd's Green, but they can't because someone's coming the other way, they're very near the bend. And my personal belief, I'm not a highways engineer and they'll have to work this out if it's put to them, and it's a point you may want to make. My personal belief is that I doubt that the Lloyd's Green junction would be permitted now if it had to be considered for building. It was built 65 years ago. But having built it, of course, it doesn't come up for review. Whether it should have another 40 houses is a real question.
Yeah. And also on that pinch point,
Well.
there is also another access from the garages behind the flats,
yep.
Where people went there for their cars,
Yep.
but also number 36 parked up there, and I park up there because there's not enough room to park all. So you're actually coming out onto the Lloyd's Green bit from a side access onto that blind bend, and at the moment it's fine because you don't get that many cars coming up and down, and of course most residents will know you're there and will be aware of you. But once you start getting general traffic using it as a cut through and things like that, that's going to be a nightmare as an accident waiting to happen.
It's a point that certainly needs examination. And again, I don't want to just sort of slope shoulders, but that's ultimately not an examination for us to make in the parish council, but it's one that should reasonably be pressed as to the fact that it is an anxiety and properly put. Yes, please.
Yeah, getting back to the school, if they build these houses and say there's 80 children, could be 100 more children, if they're going to be bused, where are they going to be bused to? Where can they go to tend to them? They're building houses in tend to schools.
I understand your point, and it's a question for KCC. Okay, does anyone else? Yes, please. Hold on, let's listen to the gentleman.
I'm a bit naive and I don't know the planning process, but it's all very reactive from the way I've been hearing. Rest assured, I don't want 40 houses built in the village. I've only been here 6 years, but I love the place, and the last thing we could do is a development of that size. However, we've also discussed the village must grow. Would it not be possible to choose our own sites? And I'm thinking just off the top of my head, if 3 houses were built in Ford Leeds, to perhaps close off any future access, and then maybe in a few years' time a similar number built on the other side of Jubilee Field to prevent any further access. And we went around the village finding small sites specifically to prevent any bigger sites being used, and we approached Ashford and said, this is what we want to do. Would that be a little more active rather than just taking this reactive stance?
You raise an important and a good point. More difficult, I think, as you said at the beginning, more difficult than it sounds at the start. Yeah, indeed. It's a cunning plan, obviously. I think that part of the problem is, and I'll sort of move the telescope out a bit, part of the problem is, I am led to believe, that now they've put the 40 in their wish list for the total that they need under government guidelines, pressure, whatever, it's difficult not to have that 40 in as a fig leaf, even if they never get built, because they've got to make the total add up and they don't know where else to put them. I'm all in favour of saying, oh yeah, well, let's find a place. By the way, it may be harder actually to find the place for 3 here, 3 there than you think, even if we could get it through Ashford. But because ultimately they decide, I mean, there's the town and country planning system in this country is what the planners always call a plan-led system. This is the plan, and it's supposed to lead the planning applications. That's the other half of it. It doesn't quite really. They'll lay down their plan, they'll say we've got sites here and there, but anyone can put in an application. It happens, I mean, that's how Pipers happened. Pipers put in their land for the plan, but before that happened, put in an application, which upset Ashford.
It just occurs to me that as must have happened in years gone by, and I live in Coonlands, and obviously
Right.
that was the development of about the 60s sometimes.
Indeed.
We must have gone through it all then. That we're going to have these meetings year after year after year, or every couple of years, and we're going to be deciding and discussing exactly the same problem.
True. True.
And there's no way out of that.
I think to the extent that there's a way out of it, it's a very difficult path. But I take your point. Thank you. You wanted to raise something, Margaret?
That's quite a good idea, actually, isn't it? 2 houses here, but that could never work because you would never get affordable houses. You've got to have 40 houses to negotiate affordable houses.
There is truth in that, and the other thing is, one of the reasons we've got the problem with the sewage, I believe, is because we grew, apart from those big sites, we also grew by infill. Infill down Swan Street, infill down the street, infill along Poplar Road, and the sewers were put in before the infill. And when you're getting infill, there's no investment in the sewage.
Could you tell me this, if you know it, Jeremy? Who is the person who says, is it the water board that says that is okay to build on? Who approaches the
Do you mean for sewage or for flooding?
Well, for anything to do with water, sewage, anything.
For sewage, Southern Water have certain rights or powers or whatever to refuse without having money spent.
Who has to go to them to get this? To get them.
I think the developer does.
The developer does.
And that's why Ashford have put in the policy to say that they'll only under that policy, and that's what it is, a policy, if the site gets accepted and it goes through with this policy unaltered, it may be altered of course, then they're saying if you want to come in with an application which would say I want to build here and you've already said I can have houses there because it's in the plan, blah blah blah, 40 and so on, they'd have to meet that obligation. By the way, someone was talking, Phil, about gardens before, and one of the things I was going to add, I did a bit of work on it, a bit of calculating earlier today. The gross density that they're proposing at this point, they said about 40. If we take it at 40, the gross density is about 6.4 to the acre, but that's gross, relatively low though I think. Now when I say gross, you've got to include the roads in that. 6.4 per acre. There are, I think maybe, I'm not very familiar with it, Forge Meads and Lloyd's Green, some of them got very big gardens and they may be even more spacious than that, I don't know. But in terms of, let's say you went and looked on the site where the shop is, or the new ones in Tenterden, I don't think you'll find 6.4 an acre. I think that's actually quite low density.
So this low density, does that mean it's lots of little cheap, easily affordable houses spread across, or is it lots of big houses which no one can afford and is it affordable housing?
That'd be up to the developer to put forward a planning application that they may or may not get.
So it could
but
be
it would be a mixture. The developer will be told he's got to build, let's say, roughly a third affordable. He then has to, in your language, make 2/3 of them unaffordable so he can make a third affordable. There will definitely be some bigger houses, there will be some smaller houses, there will be some for rent or part ownership, there will be some for sale with a mortgage. So that's for later. That's for later. Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Future of our village will have about 13 houses, 13 affordable houses if it's...
Yeah, it could be about 13 or 15 out of the 40, I understand. But that's a decision that Ashford would have to take in line with their policies, national policies and all the rest at the time there was an application, not at this point. Okay, Phil.
With regard to the drainage, the foul drains, when they were rodded in Poplar Road and Forge Meads, just a few years ago, I'm not sure, 3 or 4 years ago, I spoke to the engineer who was clearing the drain from Poplar Road up Forge Meads, and he said, I think it was only a 4-inch pipe, he said this drain was put in for Forge Meads only, and that was all it was designed to cope for. Now it's got Jubilee Fields and Woodland View, and so I can quite understand anybody who has this concern. It could be a lot like this, unless they do, as you say, put in a separate system.
Okay. Next to Phil.
I would add that the drain was put in, the main drain for Wittersham was put in
late 30s, early 40s. And the main line that goes down to the works is a 6-inch pipe. And that certainly isn't adequate.
Right, okay.
Can I just say something?
Sorry, we'll come to them.
Going on about these drainage pipes and that, the council are involved in it, the building things, surely they should check on it. Why, if you build a house and a plot there, the building inspector will make sure the drains are right and everything's right.
The building inspector will make sure if you build your house that you have to meet building regs.
Yeah.
But that's not covering the sewer, which is a statutory undertaker, which is what Southern is. Southern is supposed to be governed by statutory rules and regulations, even though they're privatised. Sorry.
I was just going to ask, I seem to remember with the Piper development that there was certainly a question that it was possible for the developer to kind of buy off various authorities with a certain amount of money to get the development through. And I wonder whether that's true with Southern Water, whether Southern Water would just say, okay, well, give us £1,000 per property and we'll go away.
It's an interesting point, and I don't know the legal answer to that. You could obviously worry about if they said, well, we know we need to do a project ourselves which is going to cost us £500,000, so if you give us £250,000, we'll call it quits, and then they don't get round to it. That would be one sort of slightly cynical view. I don't know what they're allowed to do. I really don't. You can see how a developer wouldn't want to say, I'll pay you £3 million to upgrade the sewage, even though most of its work you should have done yourself.
Yeah.
Miriam.
Going back to the point about affordable housing, I think it's very important to remember that the plan, the previous plan and the new plan allows affordable housing on exception sites. So if it was simply a site which was only for affordable houses, it would be able to be on a site which wasn't in the plan and didn't actually comply with the policy of infill. So that is always possible. The problem is actually finding somebody who's got the land, who's going to do that. But having said that, Mr. Moore at the Meadows did approach Ashford and the Parish Council to say that's what he wanted on his site. He wanted a small development of affordable houses. So there was somebody who did put forward a site, and for some reason, even though Kent Highways actually said that that site had the best access, for some reason that site got thrown out of the plan. So there was somebody who was prepared to put forward a site simply for affordable housing.
I take your point.
The village and a better site for these are access.
Okay, I take your point about affordable housing and exception sites. I don't have my mind around all the legal issues, but I understand the point you're making. I think the problem is that affordable sites are only affordable from the government's point of view, and I include the, local authorities as part of government. They're only affordable from the government's point of view if someone else is paying for them, and the way they pay for them is by building houses for sale. So you're right, an exception site has to be 100% affordable, and who's going to put housing associations if they've got the money, but it's relatively rare.
That was church land in Rolvenden.
Indeed, exactly.
The church put forward their land.
Indeed.
So we never know.
Indeed.
There might be someone in the village who would put forward a site for affordable housing. Mr. Moore was suggested it, I understand.
Okay. Does anybody else want to say something? Otherwise, I'm conscious that we're now at 9 o'clock.
I'd like to say, Mr. Chairman, that I came here with a fixed mind, really, and I've sat here and I've made myself think. I came here 50 years ago, which means it was already built. And I'm thinking that if you add up every house that's built, you're bang on your target of about 3 a year. But each lot starts off with a big start.
So we've kind of made the 3 a year so far. Our problem, and this is called a plan, I have been saying to some people the joke is that they call it a plan, but actually it is really heading. Our problem is that we need to carry on what we've achieved through all sorts of troughs and peaks and troughs, no doubt difficulties, no doubt arguments, no doubt all sorts of problems and frustrations. But our problem at the minute is we've got to where we are. You say it's 3 a year so far. The problem is, where do we get the 3 a year going on? Because if it was to be 3 a year,
50 years, that's not a bad
if
sign.
it was to be 3 a year in the 13 years that this plan covers, that's 39 houses. The difficulty that we have in this room, I think, by and large. And please, if I'm misrepresenting you, then forgive me for it for a moment. The difficulty is that just because 39 houses are needed in 13 years at 3 a year, that doesn't sound to us like a good reason for having one site of 40. But the other side of that is, would we actually find a site for 3 houses every year, year after year after year? It's beyond people's ability to kind of get through it. So we're likely to meet your requirement, which is drop off our development target, unless a big one comes along. But I don't like the big one, not until we have our discussion anyway. They may persuade me. I don't like the big one. Most of you, I don't think, like the big one. But that may be the only way we get more houses. But it's not my choice. It really isn't. Not at the minute. Anyone else want to speak? Thank you, David. Can I then close the public... Oh, Mary, please.
Yes, we did have major development in the 60s and so on, but at that point, things are very different now, because at that point we weren't in an AONB, the NPPF didn't exist, and we now have these policies and indeed law, like the countryside rights of way up to 2000, which prevents major development from happening here. I think that's the difference. Mm-hmm. In the 60s, there weren't those things that prevented. Now they are in place.
And I think you put your finger on one of many ironies, that the government has put more pressure on house building now than any time since Macmillan built 300,000 a year. And yet the government, in the usual way of things, have put more, let's call them obstacles or more protections in the way that are stopping it. That is absolutely standard as far as I can see, but that, you're quite right, that is where we are. There are more reasons against it, but that hasn't stopped us needing a lot more houses because we've got a lot more people. Everyone here with children knows the problem more than I do.
Yeah, but we know how much those children are going to need to earn in order to buy those houses from a private property.
Oh, indeed.
And the houses are cheaper in Ashford.
Indeed, but the house prices are, house prices go up because there aren't enough of them. All right, does anyone else want to make it? Yes, please.
What happened to all the money when the council sold all the council houses? There was never any more built.
Beyond my pay grade, I don't know. I think that is arguably a weakness in that policy. The opportunity was to create the home owning democracy, but it didn't actually create more homes to feed the escalator. Shall we just finish then with the little girl, and that will be the last one?
There's plenty of other places to build houses.
Oh, yeah.
I spend our time arguing like this when we could just go and make a planning application somewhere else.
All right, all we've got to do is find them. Okay, thank you very much. I will close the public session. You're very welcome to stay as long as you want, at least until we get to the closed session. Otherwise, if people are going, then thank you for your time.
Jeremy.
Oh, my knees.
Oh, your knees are on my back.
I can't. Stiff one.
Well.
There used to be a time when the cars put the jugs of water with the table in the first. And what do you remember to do? Try mine.
Yeah.
Did you? Was I speaking at the time?
Any idea what Photoshop was?
Oh, yeah.
You know, and we see it on the page every day.
I think the one. Can I just ask, please, you're all welcome to go, if you want, but can I just ask you please to be quiet so we can hear ourselves for our council meeting? Thank you very much to everybody. What are you laughing at?
Notice no one's taking up you.
Okay, off we go then. So, I hope they make their submissions.
I think there's a house at the end of the village there. You could infill 5 dozen houses here.
Oh yeah. Middle class. Okay. Right. The first thing we've got to do then is to consider what we have been hearing and our submission to Ashford on the local plan to 2030, next 13 years. It's a difficult one. Who would like to make a suggestion first? Sorry, let me stop you again, but just as you're drawing I'm sorry about that. My working assumption, I was talking to George earlier on the phone, my working assumption is that we need to talk tonight about the thrust of what we would like to say and see if we can coalesce, failing that majority, but coalesce around the thrust of what we would like to say. Get that down in bullet points and then resolve to get a text drafted afterwards which we'll pass around by email, because we can't draft it here. But if we say, well, we want to say this, this and this, but on the other hand that and that and that, then we can structure a draft, and then you can all have your go at editing it until we go mad.
Does that mean we take, so I fully understood it. I mean, I had 3 broad comments to make. One was exactly that, my contribution to what we say our response should be.
Yep.
The second thing is that there were 2 or 3 points raised which I'm not comfortable with, because I'm not sure they're actually true, or it was a bit of misinformation. Right. And I think there were a responsibility to clarify that. Right. For example, the council has not made a decision to support this because we want to make money. That is completely out of order. That's almost an accusation of fraud on the council.
Sorry, could the people at the back, excuse me, would you rather go outside or be quiet, please? Thank you.
So there's some points to be clarified there. The other point that came out and was made by several people, including the last gentleman I think there, and Pat as well, was that the bit about being, I guess, proactive. So rather than kind of wait and see what happens, and the point was made by the Ashford planner that the research that we've done in the past planning, it gets out of date clearly every year. And I think that one of the things we should be doing is exploring where those options are. So rather than reacting each time, we try and set up, and we might have to get some outside resource and invest some expert money, some money into some expertise to clarify some of these issues, because otherwise we're going to go round and round in circles each time. We are a sitting duck. I heard that there are 7 developers that have put in, and it's news to me. I'd like to know who those 7 developers are. I'd like to know why we haven't heard who the 7 developers are. Maybe I've just missed it, I don't know. So I think that falls into 3 areas. Our response, clarifying certain things that were fundamentally just not true, and thirdly, to actually put some time and effort into being proactive and plan for the future so that we don't get caught out as a sitting duck each time. Unfortunately, right now we're on the radar. So going back to my view on what the documentation has said, what the exhibition put forward, and talking to 2 of the officers there, and also listening tonight, I'd fully endorse your point that fundamentally I'd be against this. And the main reasons are that and I know we're not at the planning stage yet, but the principal stage, for me, are location. And with all the things that knock on from that, in terms of ranging from biodiversity through to traffic management, through to, I just think that I do take the point that over the last 50, 60 years, houses were not built on steady drips each year, you won't get the investment and the funding for that. They have to go in chunks, and that's how coup lands. And all that. The other point that hasn't been mentioned, I think there's a confusion between affordable housing and social housing. Social housing to a lot of people in this village is a bit of a dirty word. We don't want those people. They can go up to Ashford to a brownfield site. We have to recognise there's a difference between affordable housing and social housing. There are a lot of people who weren't at this meeting tonight for whatever reason, who've made their feelings privately known to us because they don't feel confident enough to be able to say some of these things for whatever reason. But there is a need for social housing. Affordable housing, you know, is just that. You need to be earning an income, you need to be able to get a mortgage, etc., etc. And the government's got well-publicised initiatives on that. Social housing is typically where people might be on benefits, where families are struggling. You've got families in this village who are, you know, several generations living in a village. The head tenancy is held by someone who is, say, near the end of their life, at the beginning, when they pass on. Then it won't be the people that are living in that house get that tenancy, it'll be the next person in Ashford on the housing list. And that social housing piece needs, I believe, to be addressed. But fundamentally, I would say that this particular site, unfortunately, I would not support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Good point. Can I just question, you said something then that came into my mind. It's gone just as fast. Carry on, Colin, and I'll think of it again in a minute.
Basically, I totally agree with what Paul's saying. I've had quite a number of emails and notes and individual comments from people in the village, not necessarily around the two identified areas. And every one of them, apart from one, has been totally anti this project. That's the first point. Secondly, I think the development will create a social isolation because it's out of the way. And what they're suggesting as a successor is not to the benefit of individuals, groups, or certainly the village, in my opinion. The social structure is inadequate. The road services, the seweraging, the schooling, the environment, all go against it. And so I will be totally against any development of this size at this time. I would support Paul insofar as saying is we should be proactive and not reactive in looking at the possibility of developing small sites which would include social housing. Because there is a number of young people in this village that we should take notice of and protect if at all possible. So my vote would be totally no go.
David.
Yeah, agree with what's already been said. Walking around the area over the weekend, my concern primarily is around road access at either end. I just cannot envisage what it would be like. You know, if you think that most houses these days have 2 cars plus, I cannot believe we would want to have an extra additional 80 cars around that area. I think it is an accident waiting to happen. What I was encouraged by tonight is a number of people that said they recognise the need for development to continue for the prosperity of the village, but for me this isn't the site. I also support Paul's and the suggested notion earlier on that we do need to be more proactive in looking at opportunities ourselves. I also would like us to really clarify some of the misunderstandings that there were tonight. Apart from the one about Parish Council making money through this, the idea that the Parish Council had put this proposal forward absolutely isn't our proposal. We're here to comment on it.
Okay, thank you. George.
I think my first reaction when I saw this was, what are Ashford Borough Council officers up to? I mean, I thought maybe
that's because you used to work for council.
They decided that having seen stocks turned down, they put something that was almost identical to it, but in a different place there, knowing that it would be turned down. Perhaps that was a game they were playing, or perhaps they were just totally at odds with their cabinet and didn't really care anyway. But it just seemed a very strange thing, because to me, that, I mean, a lot of the points that were made with Pipers and the stocks development still apply. I think the only one that I could see that doesn't really apply was the whole issue of that it would be creeping development that we've said was a concern with stocks.
Yeah.
Whereas this is within the confines of the village at least, although it's creeping that way as opposed to creeping along the road. But the same issues still apply. I think that, as we've already heard, the access is just ridiculous really with it, and that isn't going to be helped by having access from both ends of the road, because then it'll just become a through cut that more people use rather than make it safer. The AONB issues are exactly the same as they were before. It's in the countryside, there's a special scientific interest, the woodland, etc, etc.
I don't think it's triple SI, by the way.
No. Okay, I'll take that one back. But certainly in terms of the woodland and the points that have been made about wildlife.
It is acknowledged as ancient woodland.
Yeah, ancient woodland, that's the one. Right. Sewage again, the services. I mean, I think looking at the plan, it says they may be improved. I don't think there's any promise or guarantee that will be done. And it's been well rehearsed that there's no way that's going to work. And there's one other that I saw in here. Oh, and just really a couple of things just to finish off. But again, I'll take the point made over there and that's been made about we can't keep just saying no. We've got to say no, but here's another suggestion, or here's some suggestions for the future. So the idea of being a bit more proactive and looking at something else and trying to come up with some ideas, I think would be a good move. And just finally, I've sat here quite sort of, I don't know, cross at times tonight, because I don't think that verbal attacks on the parish council, either as a whole or individually, help the presentation of a balanced view on any discussion, and certainly not on this one. So, but overall, I wouldn't want to support the development.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Sue.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. This site was rejected in 2005 as unsuitable to be included in the plan, and I can't see that anything has changed in the 12 years, apart from the fact that Ashford have to meet their housing target. That's the only thing I can see. And I strongly suspect that if Pipers had been approved or went through an appeal, that this site wouldn't even be considered again. The access is appalling. The Swan Corner, it will be worse than it is now. And also Jubilee Fields, the whole issue of, as George said, going through, it's going to be awful.
Yep.
Sewerage, we know how bad that is. I don't see that there's a nearest point that would be acceptable. I can't see it.
No.
But I'd like to think that if we do raise the objection on it, that we can put in comments to say that we require smaller developments, because we do have youngsters, we have people that need social housing, and we have to keep this village going. So I'm totally against this site.
Okay, thank you. I said at the beginning that my opening position prior to hearing what was said in the meeting was that I didn't think it was a good site, that I didn't see how Ashford could stand this one up, having themselves, I mean it's not just the inspector, themselves turned down Pipers on all sorts of grounds, not all of which apply here, but many of them do, and at least Pipers have good access, which this one doesn't. Straight onto the B road is what I'm saying there. I haven't heard anything that tells me that I'm wrong there, or started off with the wrong kind of pre-position. I've heard some things that also worry me about the site. I think the biodiversity point was one that from the gentleman over here that I haven't heard so graphically before. I have heard, and I do actually believe what Phil said, Phil Wilcox, that gardens are potentially more ecologically friendly than monoculture farmland. But it depends, of course. There's never a straightforward answer. Depends what's being grown, which animal you're talking about, and all the rest of it. But monoculture and pesticides and fertilisers don't seem to be the best answer. And of course, gardens aren't always great either. I believe one of the best things you can have is an overgrown railway cutting. I think they're really, really good, because they go somewhere and no one does anything with them.
You're not proposing a railway line now.
No, but I'm just making an odd point that everyone thinks, railway cuttings are really bad. They're actually ecologically, I've been told, very good, except they have to wake up every so often. But so being serious about this. And by the way, just on the access point, I think there's an extra little twist to this. I think if it was built, allocated and built, my suspicion is that most traffic coming out of the site would use Lloyd's Green rather than Forge Meads, because once you're on it, it's straight, it's relatively wide, and it's relatively unparked, whereas the other one is heavily parked, junctions and bends, and narrow. That means that it's not sort of 40 houses, 20 each way. It's most of the 40 going on a road that presently is doing 25 or 30. And that's the one with the bad junction at the end. At least if you come out of Forge Meads, although I've been told by Phil Wilcox, who looks out over it, that is a very dodgy junction because people abuse it, and you live near it.
Yes, that's right.
People abuse the junction, cut across the corner and all the rest of it. But at least if they bothered to stop and look, they can see both ways. Whereas at Lloyd's Green you can't. So I think access is very poor. And as I said in the discussion earlier, in the debate, I think that I can't imagine that it would be permitted nowadays. But what's there is not a decision that an officer has to put his name to.
But the other point you make regarding both entries and exits are both dependent on the speed of the cars coming down the 2082. And not many, including farm vehicles, are going at the requisite speed.
Don't start David going again.
But that's a point. That's a very clear point. It is a dangerous situation at both ends, being in the middle of that on Poplar Road.
Sure.
So it is even worse from Forge Mead and from Lloyd Green. And they're not coming in, even though we want them to come in at 30 miles an hour. They're not doing it.
No, I take it. Yes.
And the traffic is going to get even more with the
it won't get less.
development by Tesco.
Yeah. Well, if anybody's moved, if the development went ahead and 40 houses were built, as David rightly says, it may be two-car families for the simple reason of employment rights. Where it's going to go locally for employment.
Sure. So coming back to what I said before, I haven't moved my view. No one has persuaded me, as I put it earlier, that I should support it. I started off with a presumption, if that's the right word, that I didn't like the site. I think that so I'm against it, and I would join everyone else's views. What we've got to do is try and put these into shape of, if people agree with me here, we want to be saying we don't like this site while making it very clear that we are not actually saying nothing. We're saying we ought to have something. It's going to be difficult to figure out what and where, because let's be honest, wherever we go, there'll be some people that won't like it. That's the nature of things. That's what the poor planners and mixed planning committee have to worry about. And I should say, in case anyone gets the wrong impression, his planning committee did not approve this plan. It went to a special task group and the cabinet. Sure. And he claims to be absolutely innocent in this. But the fact is, planning's difficult. I mean, planning applications are one thing, because often neighbours, everyone gets on together on a small thing. But as soon as you get into these plans, they're awful. This tonight has been no worse than I expected it to be. Maybe a bit better actually in some ways. and I'm actually grateful for everyone's contributions, even when I didn't agree with them. So I think we've got to try and encapsulate the fact that we're not in our village. We are saying, yes, we would like things. We don't like this site, unanimously, the 6 of us. And I would like, actually, to go back to the status quo ante of the submission we made last year. I know Miriam said that it was mistaken by Ashford, but the position we put last year was that we wanted some growth and we needed to find places to do it. And the informal response from the head of planning policy was, fine, let's talk about it and let's look for places. I'm not blaming him for where we've got to, because he's got a gun to his head to say 1,200 houses, get on with it. So let's be honest, he's got a rotten job. But I would like to go back to that position and make it clear to Ashford and to the inspector that that's what we'd like to do. And I think on that basis, although it would be a tough one to do, I think we'd have more support in the village. Okay, can we finish that one then? So can I just put a resolution, please, that we will now agree the text by email? Can I have a proposer?
Sorry, Jeremy, before...
So go on, George.
The consultation form, the guide that's online, is that what we're going to be responding to? Or are we allowed to be wider than that? Because it seems to be very narrow in terms of there were 4 areas you could actually say whether you felt it was sound or unsound.
I agree with what you say about it. I don't like the form, and I'm sure our Borough Council will take that back. I noted that it says here, although Yvonne has been told very firmly, if you don't tick all the boxes in the right places, they won't take it. It says all representations received will be considered as part of a public examination by an independent planning inspector. And it also says somewhere, I think,
You see, that follows on
please,
from the please use this form to set out your representation.
Indeed. No, I don't mind using the form. Please respond to the questions as completely as possible. Yeah. That says, well, don't answer the ones you don't want to. So whether that's what they meant, and they'd like us all to do everything that would suit them, I think that they are actually obliged to put before the inspector and to study themselves what we put in. Now, I would say that we answer the questions as far as we can. We sketch around them where they are a bit difficult, and we put in the text as it is. And it does say that if the text is too long, they'd like a 100-word summary for the inspector, and that summary goes bang, bang, bang.
Right.
I totally agree, but I think we should submit. There's nothing wrong with submitting an addendum or an appendix to that as well, so that that's received officially, and it's recorded as such. Even if the inspector, when he's considering a number of different applications, he obviously wants to get a summary. We need to make sure the paperwork.
Oh yes, no, we put in the full text, but it then says, it does say somewhere, to help the independent planning inspector manage the examination. Oh no, sorry, we ask that representations are concise, and where they are necessarily detailed, that you provide a concise summary setting out your main points, is what it says there. And I think somewhere else it suggests 100 words, but
so
I may have.
There is nothing wrong in
but to assist the independent inspector, a summary of no more than 100 words should be included.
There's no harm in putting a 100-word summary in that situation with an appendage.
Oh yeah, well, you can have the long thing.
Yes,
plus
precisely. That's what I'm saying.
Definitely.
I would totally agree, because I've been given a copy of that. I was totally confused at once.
Yeah, sure.
It didn't answer me what I wanted to put.
The reason I was asking that question, Jeremy, was just that if we're then discussing it via email, we know what to base it against. If that's what we're supposed to be answering, then we know what we're doing.
Yes, I think if we're happy that we submit what we can do, but then put an appendage as to what we want to put.
And do we also encourage people in the village?
Yes,
very much. I'm hoping.
I have been all over the place.
I meant to send out people with that message, but it probably wouldn't have made any more difference than I'd said before. They really do all need to do their own, even though it's a pain of a form.
I've got some, and I've put everywhere that they can come from me. There's in the notice boards, Facebook, website.
I'm sorry for a lot of individuals in the village who might find that not difficult to do, but complete in the way that they would like it to be.
Yeah.
It doesn't give
It's
them
not user friendly, is it?
It's not user friendly at all.
There are probably, if they wanted, there are probably people in the village who would help other people in the village do it.
I'm sure. But it isn't user friendly. It may be that we wish to put that point across.
So I realise we're all talking to people in the village when we see them, but how can we get that message out to the wider village? Is there? Can we?
We've got the market on Tuesday. We've got the walk on Wednesday. There may be one or two other things, but it's often the same people come together.
On the Facebook page?
The link to
the form.
This, no, only telling everybody where they can
Well, let's put
get
the links
it.
on, and let's also put it on next door.
Next door as well.
Yeah.
Then everyone will know.
Can you put it on next door, because you know how to do it now, because she's not on next door because she doesn't live in Wittersham. She, the clerk. She is a normal
The honourable lady.
It's a good pronoun for females.
Can you put her address as a village hall? Spends a lot of time here.
So you were going to propose the motion that we'll approve a text by email, and David will second it. Is everyone in favour of that?
Yeah.
Good, thank you very much. The one thing, of course, is that Alan can't, I suppose, take part in it.
Oh, but he can fill the form.
He can fill the form in.
He can fill the form in.
He'll be very grateful for that suggestion.
Yes, he did. He did.
But we can't.
I understand that.
The other thing, I think, we did talk last time about this. I don't know if anyone took a different view. Last time when we had one of these things to do, we took the view that councillors, apart from Alan, wouldn't actually do a personal submission because they were double dipping. And I think that probably, there's nothing as far as I know in the rules to say we can't, but I think we probably shouldn't. Spouses can, yeah, if you can persuade them.
I'll probably end up doing it.
Boys' jobs and girls' jobs. Okay, so we're all happy with that. Thank you very much. Shall we move on?
Yeah.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda, I can now turn the page. To agree to support or not CALP's response to a local plan. This is the thing that came around that you will have seen, where they wanted to amend the wording in the separation of settlements policy, which they've already put into the Ashford plan, but they wanted, I think, to change a may to a will or something. There may have been something else about it.
Yes, may to a.
So we can support that?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. I thought we'd agreed.
Yes, but I wanted to
what we agreed before was a long submission that's still not been put to us for signature, which was really from the Shaddockshurst screen when they lost a green site and were deeply unhappy and wanted to nag ministers.
Yeah.
This is really just a little thing about the policy that Ashford have put in on separation of settlements, where they've said that something along the lines, if I remember rightly, you'll know better, something like
I've got it here.
The planning authority. Okay, thank you. Even better. Thank you. Perfect. At our last meeting, yes, we support them. I'll just read the important bit. We support the new policy SP7, separation of settlements. Proposals for built development on non-allocated sites outside the built confines of settlements shall be permitted only where its impact individually or cumulative would not result in coalescence or merging of two or more separate settlements, or the significant erosion of a gap between settlements resulting in the loss of individual identity or character. With regard to the second paragraph, we suggest that the word will be replaced by may, back to front of what I said, to prevent any assumption that permission will be granted. In other words, they may grant permission in certain circumstances, not will.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what that was for, but that was the point. So we'll support that. Thank you.
Yes.
Now we come on to the transfer deed for the cemetery extension in accordance with the request by the council's solicitor and to pay the balance of fees and disbursements. Now the first part of this is the transfer deed. This has taken about a year and a half to get to this point, or 2 years, but we have now got a transfer deed put to us, which I have to sign with a witness, which has to be, I think, not the clerk, funnily enough, according to the solicitor. Which they can then put through with the other side, and it gets transferred to us, so we then actually have the land, which is a step forward. It's been round on circulation and you've already seen it. You've all seen it. Are you all happy for me to sign that?
Yes.
Okay, I shall do that. I won't do it at this moment, but I shall do it because I need to get it witnessed by somebody who's apparently not linked, I think the clerk is.
It all depends when you want it doing.
As soon as possible. So which way do you mean?
Well, and you want a second signature.
It's going to be witnessed.
Witness.
I suppose you are. I suppose you are not linked, are you? Unlike the council people. So what have I got? What have we got to do then?
If you want to get it done,
Signed as a deed for and on behalf of Wittersham Parish Council. That's the mallets up there. So here I'm going to sign here. And you're going to do a witness signature. And then do your other stuff after.
And this one?
You're going to put a bit more in there.
It's the one that uses in Wittersham.
you can carry on.
So now we own it, what should we build there?
something triangular.
I'll put my occupation's retired.
Yes, that's just you sign that.
No, you might do something about that.
Thank you for that, Mick. So now the clerk will account for the fees.
Thank you. To say that I'm not impressed with their accounts department, it's a minor statement. You will remember that they had a completion statement in with that, and it had invoice numbers. Well, one of them we'd already paid. If you remember, £600 we were asked to pay for the Mallett's solicitor, and I was told at the time that that was the total amount. But I hadn't had an invoice for that, but we'd paid it and we'd had that acknowledged. And then we had an invoice for a part payment, and they asked for a payment by return, and I had to point out that they'd already had £250 initially, if you remember. So I had to write and say, you've already had that. And so on this, there was another invoice that I didn't recognise. So I asked for a copy of that, where it said final invoice for £490 with the VAT and the land registration fee. So they then sent me that invoice together with the Mallett's invoice asking for payment in full on both of them. So I then pointed out that we had already paid £600 of the £609 because they then put a couple of disbursements on. And also when we agreed on what we were going to, which form of documentation we were going to ask them to do, we were quoted £450, and by now they were £640 they were charging us instead of £450. So I pointed that out, and after a couple of terribly sorry for a muddle, I've now got correct invoices going back to just charging us for £450 plus the £90, these £40 for the land registration fee, £250 of which of course we've already paid. So they just put it on one invoice, plus £9 balance on the Mallett's one, which were for online searches. So instead of the £579 that they wanted, it's actually £339.
Well done. Well done. So
it's all tidy now.
It's all tidied up. So what's the
So this is the fees for doing all the work. Yes, so that's all that we've actually paid out.
395.
Well, no,
we've
the
paid
450 plus the
Yes,
600.
that's what I'm trying to think.
Yes.
So what's it?
Yeah, so it's 1,000
It's
or
1,000
whatever.
pounds.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So what came halfway through the problem.
We're paying both sides as usual.
Yes, but I understand.
Yes.
I understand.
And it
Yeah.
now ties up, when you allow for the disbursements,
Yeah.
it's basically what they said.
Well, they were talking about £100 disbursements, and this is actually only, by the time I made a fuss, we're
But in
down to
terms of
49.
the actual record actually what the actual expenditure was in the minutes.
Sorry, say that again.
We can actually put in the minutes.
Yes.
What it was. Well, the earlier minutes, of course, from previous months have had the various bits on them.
Yes, when we paid, because that had to come
And
through.
now this is the thing. So in this minute, what I think Colin is saying
That
is
I
that
need-
when
I will
we
put it-
authorise this, and you say on the total,
Yeah.
you would do
That's
that.
what I'm saying.
That's what he's asking.
it's
That would be
clear.
good. Then we all know where we are.
Precisely.
Good.
As,
Okay.
as if I wouldn't, may I add.
Perfect. So we've done that one then. The next one is to authorise a couple of small payments. Names Co Limited for the renewal of the domain name for 2 years. This is for our internet.
Wittersham.org.
www. And that is £43.99 plus VAT.
So you're all happy with that?
Yes. Agreed. And the local council review subscription, that's the magazine that comes out from Melt, which we have to pay for
Happy
separately.
with that. Thank you.
£17 agreed. You know the date of the next meeting.
It's not what it said there.
Sorry?
It's not what it says on my agenda.
Oh, isn't it?
It's the 13th of September
I said
2016.
Does it really?
Yeah, I was going to
Really?
my apologies for
Well, that's the deliberate mistake that I didn't even notice.
Knocking years
And I'll give my apologies now. I have a JTB meeting that night on the 12th.
On the 12th.
Not as if you cut and paste them from previous months.
You'd never think so, would you?
Nick's been waiting all night to make that.
Yeah, no, I've only just noticed it. 30 seconds before we got it. I'm trying to go one night.
Yeah.
Just checking his
Yeah,
car
he's always
wheels are
ahead of
still
the
on.
game.
Is it would it be possible to yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, once the chairman has.
What about the other dates for meeting round on the corner? All the other dates you sent round.
Oh yes, we have. I did go. I came back with. It's the 10th.
Sunday the
10th.
10th of September.
12:30.
Yeah, apart from you. So I'm sorry, Colin,
12:30,
but
Sunday the 10th.
I know if you keep going away.
Well, that's good. That's one of the problems. I did warn him.
You did.
Do you want to post it though?
Thank you.
What's the meeting going on?
It's free. Stand outside, mate.
Okay.
Yes, hang on.
So
I've
now
got to.
we've got to resolve
I've got
by
to-
the nature of the sense. Sorry, what are you saying now?
No, you carry on. It's
To resolve by the
resolving.
nature of the sensitivity of the next item to exclude the public, the proposed cemetery extension.
I'm actually public, you see.
Oh.
You are.
I was going to say, would it be in order if I said a couple of words on this meeting tonight?
All right. Do you want me to?
Can
Yeah,
I?
turn that off, yeah.
Can